One easy way to compare liberalism versus conservatism is to examine how governments have fared when executing policies according to those principles. So to better understand what happens when Democrats run your state, we'll examine the liberal stronghold of California. And by doing so, we may find some insight into whether or not the mantras that left-wingers chant actually perform better when put into actual practice. Here's what happens when Democrats run your state.
The new state report says about 110,000 Californians moved out of the state last year. As KCRA3 Sharikina Shams reports, the numbers tell a story about jobs and the economy.
Its population grew at more than double the national average until 1990. Then something changed. Last decade, 2 million more Americans moved out of California than moved in.
A new state report says more people left California last year than the number who came in, a net loss of about 14,000 people.
Between 2001 and 2009, almost 650 Californians migrated to states like Oregon, Arizona, Texas, Nevada.
Your special reports have looked at businesses, but what about just population numbers? California has always been seen as a magnet, people moving here from other states. Is that still happening?
Actually, the opposite is now true, where California has net exported close to 100,000 people. Most of them moved in, according to the latest census figures. The prime destination is Texas.
It may be a state of stunning beauty and wonderful weather, but people are still leaving California in droves. Some 3.5 million residents deserting this state in the last 30 years.
But why are people fleeing California? There are several reasons. The first being that liberal control means a big, over-regulating government.
California will probably go broke.
California is broke. It's not only broke, it's broken. Liberals broke it. Nobody can argue, no one with a shred of commitment to honesty can argue conservatives broke California. Liberal policies in a state where they can do whatever they want have broken the golden state, the state people went to get rich. You now go there to get poor. You leave to get rich.
It's California arrogance, right? It's what draws people to California in the first place, is this sense that nothing is really real here, and that's okay. I'll just close by saying this. Typical of the California attitude is, I got into a brief debate with a woman who was a Democratic local council person in Irvine, California. And she was saying, well, because we got in the middle of this, she said, if Republicans are really so great, how come California's doing so well? California is the 7th biggest economy in the world, and it's run by Democrats. And I said, it is the 7th biggest economy in the world. And before the Democrats got a hold of it was the 5th biggest economy in the world. and it takes a while to bleed out that much prosperity, but they're doing it. Everybody's leaving. Boeing left Washington for the same kind of reasons. We are the poorest state in the nation. By any reasonable accounting of assets and liabilities, California is the poorest state in the union. Debt is unbelievable. And nobody wants to look at the red ink on the spreadsheet. All they do is look at the black ink. And so more and more red ink builds up, and sooner or later, they're going to pay. We're going to pay.
And what's happening is that because of high taxes, big regulations, unhealthy lawsuit climate, and a lot of government spending, people are leaving the state.
In just this century, Texas has created more than 1 million new jobs. California's lost more than 500,000. From 2004 to 2010, 680,000 people moved from other states to Texas, a whopping 185,000 of them California.
Meanwhile, many California companies are thinning their ranks. Chevron is moving 800 jobs from their Bay Area headquarters to Texas. Waste Connections shifted more than 100 jobs to Texas from Folsom, and other California firms are also on the move.
While the Golden State taxes and regulates companies near to death. For example,
the average small business in California is hit for about $134,000 per year in compliance costs to comply with the regulations in the state of California.
Dozens of companies are considering packing up and leaving. Dozens already have. Even as we've been here in California for a couple of days, we've heard about more businesses pulling up stakes right now.
The legislature passes, on average, around 900 bills a year. Laws. Here you go, Governor. 3 a day, or even 4 a day when they're in session. And the kind of laws that they're passing in California, they're saying you can't, as a parent, hire a psychiatrist to try to make your kid not gay. I mean, it's that level of crazy specificity, increasing the penalties, the fines for throwing citrus onto a minor league baseball field. Seriously, that was a law passed a couple.
I mean, when the City Council of San Francisco proposes to ban goldfish, you know you have an intrusive situation.
You know, the fact of the matter is that people have too much space in their houses, and we could just share our space with other family members. We would reduce our housing needs right there. And I think the number of housing units needed is a lot less than people think, because the old standard for housing is basically circa 1980, when people all lived in their own independent apartments or independent housing units. There was no doubling up at that time. And that's probably never going to be seen again in America. We're always going to be, well, you know, we have assimilation going on in LA right now. You know, assimilation is a two-way street. And so we're all living to live like Asians with multi-generational families. That's the American way now.
In Texas. Texas is just a wonderful state. It's a wonderful state. I mean, we went to a little town in the middle of nowhere, and we were talking with some of the people there, and they were talking about how they were basically just able to build their houses without any state permitting, without any local permitting. They just go out and build a house. Like, that's America, man. I mean, that's awesome. In California, you have to get a permit to retile your bathroom. I mean, legitimately, you have to get a permit to retile your bathroom. In my house.
A good example is if you want to build a strip mall. It takes, just to get permission to break ground and start construction, it takes 4 to 5 months on average in Texas. It takes 4 to 5 years on average in California. And that's one of the things that helps drive up the cost of housing and business complexes and factories in California.
Companies leave for 3 primary reasons: high taxes, excessive regulations, and the threat of really ridiculous lawsuits.
And they are leaving for places like Arizona, a state that means business. Arizona's fast-track permitting allows certified architects and engineers in Phoenix to get building permits in a single day. By contrast, Dwayne Woods will tell you that California's process is painfully slow. As the former executive at Waste Management, the largest recycling company in the world, Woods moved his regional headquarters from California to Arizona.
We started trying to permit a major recycling facility in LA, at an old landfill site, mind you. That site is still not permitted to this day.
How long has that taken?
Over 10 years.
And after a decade, there is still no facility in California. Yet it took just 2 years to build the same plant in Arizona.
If you took a whiteboard and said, how can we make it difficult? How many agencies can we layer on? California's as complex as it can be. It's not an employer-friendly state to that, and it's to that end, it's more difficult, definitely more costly to operate in.
Of all states, California ranks dead last for policy friendliness, with key negatives for high taxes, high workers' compensation costs, and high electricity costs.
All the green policies, essentially, renewable mandates.
Renewable mandates are for solar and wind and other things which are higher cost, and because California's imposed that on their energy industries, costs are higher in California than in Texas. Is that
That's right, about 50% higher in California.
50% higher.
Yeah, and they're going up. That's the scary thing, is that they could go up even more.
Government at the state and local level consumes about 1/3 more of the economy in California than it does in Texas. And that, with that extra government, you have things like 1/3 of the nation's welfare recipients are in California, even though they only have 1/8 of the population. You have more regulations, more taxes, everything.
We have a graph of the welfare recipients, the percentage of households receiving public assistance. Much higher in California than the U.S. average, and lower than average in Texas.
What you see is that the state with the highest poverty rate in the nation is California, higher even than the District of Columbia. And that should really be a warning or caution to progressives who maintain that this big government model is really the path to prosperity. We argue that it's entirely the opposite, that in fact Texas is a model for how America could be better run and there could be more prosperity by having less government.
California's had over 10% unemployment every month of Barack Obama's presidency until basically last November.
And it's still 3% higher than Texas.
Yes, and it's been higher in California than the national average every month since 1990.
There's been more job growth in Texas. Texas gained in the past 10 years more than 1 million jobs. California lost about 500,000 jobs.
But the Brown administration denies that California is bleeding jobs to other states.
Texas Governor Rick Perry taking a victory lap this week after Toyota announced it will move its national headquarters and thousands of jobs to the Lone Star State after 30 years in California. It's a big win for the governor, who has made it his mission to lure companies away from high-tax, high-regulation states. California Governor Jerry Brown, who's up for re-election this November, had this to say about the automaker's move.
We got a few problems. We have lots of little burdens and regulations and taxes. But smart people figure out how to make it.
Notice California Governor Brown's rebuttal to companies leaving California in droves due to excessive overregulation by big government liberals. He says smart people figure out how to make it, which means there must be a lot of dumb business owners in California, because Spectrum Location Solutions found that about 9,000 companies moved their headquarters or diverted projects to out-of-state locations away from California from 2008 to 2015 due to the Golden State's hostile business environment. And they aren't all mom-and-pop shops. Companies like Toyota, Carl's Jr., and Nestle, among others, have found California to be bad for business. But it's not just high taxes and excessive regulations. Its anti-business sentiment has created the perfect breeding grounds for frivolous lawsuits. California ranks as the worst state in America for treatment of class action lawsuits, the worst for damages applied to lawsuits, the third worst in timeliness of decisions in the litigation of those lawsuits. They rank fifth worst in judges' competence and second worst in judges' fairness, according to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. California is perpetually ranked among the worst governed states in America and has more debt than any other state and the worst credit rating of any other state. But how do they rack up such massive debt? Where does all the money go? The first thing big government bureaucrats do with your tax dollars is give it to their own being other government workers and massive unions that are big donors to Democratic politicians.
Is that the Los Angeles City Council members are paid $178,000 per year?
They are the highest paid legislative body in the nation, John. We just had a councilwoman that Janice Hahn went to Congress, the House of Representatives, and she has to take a cut in pay. They make more money than United States senators for a Los Angeles City Council.
Los Angeles, each councilman is given a car?
They get a car that has a license plate that says exempt, so they can park in meters and they don't get tickets.
$178,000 per year in Los Angeles versus in Dallas, $37,000, San Antonio, $1,400.
California is not a right-to-work state. They have very powerful unions, especially government unions. They are to spend millions and millions of dollars to promote bigger government and higher taxes.
4 California cities have now declared bankruptcy, Stockton the biggest, and San Bernardino. The result isn't pretty. Some 50-year-old retirees were promised they can collect forever. Well, until they die, but actually after that too, because their spouse may collect after they die, and the money just isn't there. Politicians promised them much more money than the town had. So, do the people in San Bernardino realize that's the reason the town went belly up? No. One union blamed the mayor and former city manager for spending money on a downtown movie theater.
Yeah, the movie theater is nice, but it's nothing compared to the $45.8 million deficit that the city of San Bernardino is running. And by the way, when they filed for bankruptcy, they had $150,000 in the city bank account.
The San Bernardino politicians said, we didn't see it coming. How could they? They owed $46 million. They had $100,000 in the bank.
Yes, and they have payments that they're required to pay into CalPERS, $1.8 million a month. And they didn't see that coming with $150K in the bank. Nothing's going to cover these pension obligations, not in San Bernardino, not in Stockton, not in Vallejo, not in Compton, not in any of these other cities in California that are simply failing.
California's also going bankrupt. $167 billion in debt. Are you kidding me? That is grossly irresponsible for a state with as many natural resources as California. I mean, these pinheads in Sacramento think they can just spend money and other people have to pick up the tab.
Tough times in Stockton, California, with that city, the largest one ever to file for bankruptcy. And city officials are saying it was tough but necessary. Stockton is one of 3 cities now to declare bankruptcy in the state. According to Vice Mayor Kathy Miller, public safety employees were costing the city, on average, more than $150,000 each per year. We heard about that hefty benefit package there and for those employees. How did it get to that point where they were able to collect so much?
You know, it happened incrementally over about a 10-year period.
and during the 1990s. And Stockton's not alone in this. Cities all across our state, especially, really ramped up enhanced pensions and increased benefits. And one of the benefits that Stockton granted to its employees, which ended up really being the largest single problem that we have financially, is we granted free lifetime medical benefits to our retirees.
Wow.
The mayor of Stockton, who owns this balloon shop, thinks her city and her country will find a way out of their current malaise.
I think we have a good future. I think we're still figuring out how we play that future, what role we have, and how we resume again our prominence in innovation and manufacturing and a lot of those industries. It's a matter of evaluating who we want to be when we grow up.
The mayor of Stockton is the owner of a balloon shop. That's right, a balloon shop. And after her incompetence and fidelity to the left-wing policies inevitably ends in failure, she says Stockton is still figuring out what they are, which is interesting because this is a city first established in 1850 and had a population of over 50,000 people by 1950, over 100,000 residents by 1970, and nearly 250,000 residents by the year 2000. And yet she says the city is still figuring out who and what they are. The left-wing state of California ended its 2014-2015 fiscal year negative $175 billion. California Democrats are so liberal with taxpayers' money, they'll spend it on just about anything, as long as it makes them look compassionate and pleases their voter base. In Richmond, California, the Office of Neighborhood Safety was paying young men not to kill each other, with a maximum of $1,300 per month not to kill someone, funded by taxpayers. California Democrats are now pushing legislation aimed at helping poorer families be able to take beach vacations. Assembly Bill 250 would direct the State Coastal Conservancy to develop new, low-cost accommodations and improve existing affordable accommodations with the goal of making a trip to the beach more accessible for families that don't have a lot of money. The city of San Francisco has implemented multiple government-funded projects to curtail the public health problem of feces and used syringes all around the city, and the liberal elitists who inhabit San Francisco says it's everyone else, the people inhabiting the non-coastal states, that are the idiots. People and businesses are leaving California because left-wing belief systems inevitably create a massive government with excessive regulations and overspending on anything that could win them a vote, but also through spending billions annually on illegal immigrants and horrendous public schooling systems.
California owes an astounding $167 billion, and it's running an annual deficit of about $9 billion, money that can never be paid back. And what is California getting for all that? High school graduation rate, 37 out of 50 states.
Businesswoman Lana Zweigart decided that placing her son in a crowded high school where many students do not speak English was simply not an option. Rather than pay the high tuition costs of a private school, Zweigart decided it was time to move her family and her company out of California. Her story is the story of middle-class Californians and business owners that have simply had enough of the declining quality of life and no longer have any faith that Sacramento and Washington will act to secure the border and protect American citizens.
I've been in California for 31 years. I have 2 children, and I have progressively felt the decline of where I live, within my business, within my family. Well, Pomona, when I first moved in, was a wonderful little small community, very family-orientated. I can't go there any longer. With my surroundings of being bombarded by illegal immigration, schools, they're catering to the illegals.
Again, I think the primary message is that it is the obligation and mission of our public schools to educate all children, regardless
Not
of
illegals.
American immigration status. This is
Not
a right.
illegals.
These children have a right to an education.
Particularly the border crossing is dear to our heart. We have just recently funded a few projects specifically addressing on the border crossing and to reduce the waiting time as cars come in and to reduce the pollution.
What?
And we should ask for next question, please. We would like to give the opportunity to the LA downtown office.
They're letting people cross faster.
Communities that are sometimes threatened or intimidated by giving comment in a language that isn't as comfortable to them. So,
este foro va a ser en español y en inglés. En español vamos a hablar y en inglés. For in English, it's going to be in your headset. Spanish, we're going to be speaking on the microphone.
We live in America. It should be in English.
More people here speak English and Spanish.
Hey, one of the primary reasons that I'm taking my family out of here is because of the public school system. And if I would have had to send my children to their neighborhood schools, we would have had to speak Spanish in order for him to go there. When we get things from the school district, it comes in Spanish. I speak English, I want things in English, and I demanded that our school not cater to Spanish speaking. They have to learn English.
California is ranked among the worst public schooling systems in America and is annually in the bottom 20% of schools nationwide. But the good news is, teachers in California are one of the highest paid in the nation. Despite California ranking 48th of 50 states in math and 49th in reading, the teachers are being compensated pretty well. In 1992, the LA Times wrote an article about A.G. Curry Middle School in Tustin, California, celebrating the diversity by flying 65 flags of students' home countries. The principal said he planned to turn Curry Middle School into a model multicultural school. By 2010, A.G. Curry Middle School was 88% Hispanic, and that same year the school scored a D- in math, a C in language, and a C+ in science for an overall grade of a D+. California hosts 12% of the population and has over 30% of the nation's welfare recipients. With so many leeches on the system, left-wingers have decided to keep them happy. They must spend more because that's the only way people will vote for them, if they get free stuff in return. California spends $859 million per year on imprisoning illegal immigrants. Los Angeles alone spends more than $1.6 billion a year on illegal aliens, $600 million on welfare, $550 million on public safety, $500 million on healthcare. In 2003, 70% of the 2,300 babies born in Stockton's San Joaquin General Hospital were anchor babies. By 2013, the city of Stockton was bankrupt. Protesters packed the San Joaquin County Board of Supervisors meeting demanding that vacant positions at the hospital to be filled immediately because it was so understaffed. Trauma patients were sometimes being directed to Modesto, California, which delayed them receiving medical treatment. San Joaquin General Hospital CEO said an increase in gunshot victims has led to the shortage, with 200 patients being treated per month as opposed to 110 patients per month in past years. Despite illegal immigration sucking money from California, delusional liberals in California say illegal immigration makes the state stronger. After several decades of Democratic control in the state legislature, California now faces an unfunded pension liability of no less than several $100 billion. The state is also experiencing unprecedented middle-class flight, skyrocketing housing costs that are 250% more than the national average. Businesses of all kinds have been fleeing the state due to everything from excessive regulations, high taxes, or mandatory $15 minimum wages. California has horrible schools and regularly among the highest unemployment rates in the country. From 2007 to 2010, the number of children living in poverty in California grew by 30%, and 1 out of 5 children in California grew up in poverty. This is what Democrats have done to California. But Democrats have solutions for their money woes. It's a plan that is a regular go-to for liberals when they overspend to try and win votes by giving away free stuff, and that plan is taxing the rich.
She's called for upping the top tax brackets in America to 80% or more.
The wealthiest 1%. I would like to tax them at higher rates across the board on their salary, on their investments, and also on what they're passing to the future generation.
Yeah, well, they just passed by a ballot initiative one of the largest tax increases in history.
Tax the rich.
They've increased taxes by $50 billion. So, yes, suddenly it's going to look a lot more balanced there. But they're also lying. I mean, they're talking about revenue projections that will not come true. It's an annual tradition in California. Your budget looks balanced in January when you propose it. And then when the revenues actually start coming in, you say, oh, there's a shortfall. And that shortfall could be $8 billion. It has been as high as $30 billion in recent years. We'll see that happen again.
So clearly, California has serious economic problems. The state has the lowest credit rating of any other state. It's falling deeper into debt. So is this just a reality that they need to face, that deep cuts need to be made because they can no longer spend beyond its means?
We should be getting a more equitable system of taxation and taxing the wealthier at rates that are commensurate with other states. We need to be able to raise revenue in an equitable fashion in the state. Californians actually pay a lower tax base than most other states.
Where the top marginal tax rate in California is what?
13.3%.
And in Texas?
0.
0. That would seem to be
That's a
an
different
advantage. That'll even get Freeman's attention.
I think it would get anyone's attention.
And California has had an issue with its revenue, that is, raising enough revenue to provide the services that Californians need.
This is another part of the problem. Notice this college professor's explanation for the problem, that California has a revenue problem. By revenue, she means taxes. But California's problems are not because they don't tax enough or that they don't tax the rich their fair share.
That California has the most progressive tax system in the United States. We do ask those who make the most money to pay the highest percentage of taxes.
California is among the highest tax states in the country. California has the highest personal income tax of any other state in America, significantly higher than any other state. The Federation of Tax Administrators ranks California as the top taxer with a 12.3% income tax, and if you make over $1 million in the state of California, the income tax rate jumps to 13.3%, nearly 30% higher than the number 2 state of Oregon. The top 1% of earners in California account for over 40% of income tax revenue. California is 4th highest in the nation in per capita corporate income tax revenues. California is the highest sales tax than any other state. California is the highest gasoline tax than any other state. California even taxes carbon emissions. California's problems are not the result of not taxing enough or the rich not paying their fair share. California does not have a revenue problem. California has a spending problem. Turns out giving away free stuff to people in exchange for votes can be very expensive.
I think the politicians want to get reelected, and the state government workers want to get as much as they can before the whole house of cards comes tumbling down. The problem is California is Greece, the Greece of America. There are too many people riding in the wagon, not enough people pulling the wagon. Now they've raised taxes, so you're going to see the productive people leaving the state and more people living off the government, voting for more government, but sooner or later, nobody's there to pay the bills. It's too expensive to create jobs. It's too expensive to finance a bloated workforce. It's too expensive to maintain all these pensions. But by the time you reach that level, if more than 50% of the voters in your state are somehow riding on the wagon, are either government welfare beneficiaries, government workers, or the retired living off government, how do you ever change? And that's what makes me so pessimistic. A beautiful state that I think is being ruined by big government.
California has failing infrastructure all over, with an estimated $130 billion backlog in needed infrastructure repairs. California just passed another tax increase, a 12 cents per gallon gas tax and 20 cents per gallon on diesel fuel, while also increasing the vehicle licensing fee from $25 to $175 per year, depending on the value of your vehicle, the average fee increasing by $48 per year. California's general fund has increased by $36 billion over the past 6 years, and yet there's no money for infrastructure. The money they should have spent on infrastructure, they spent on their constituents and voters in the form of government handouts. The bad business climate created by liberals forces businesses to flee. With less jobs, unemployment rates become high. Importing immigrants from third world countries who are largely uneducated, unskilled, and speak little to no English makes employing them difficult, so they live off the taxpayer. Never-ending welfare benefits given to the poor provide just enough to get by, and in return generate loyalty to Democratic politicians because the poor depend on them for their income. So voting Democrat is essential to their livelihood. Modern liberalism, as exemplified in the state of California, is a giant Ponzi scheme, which inevitably ends in financial collapse. And when that collapse happens, they won't say it's because of government. They will say it's because of capitalism and greed. And so in order to save us from greedy capitalists, we need more government control. In a previous video, I covered how liberals' so-called compassion destroyed the economy, and after it happened, they didn't attribute the failure to left-wing politicians implementing compassionate policies that ignore basic economic principles. They say it's because government didn't do enough, and that will always be the answer when Democrats and government ruin their surroundings. The Ponzi scheme is Democrats win votes by appealing to the emotions of the populace. They champion to help the poor, the sick, and people from third world countries, and the way they help them is by giving them free stuff, welfare benefits, free schooling, scholarships, free health care, increasing minimum wages, and appealing to each and every union, giving them more money, more benefits in exchange for votes. But all these promises cost money. But the government doesn't know how to make money. Government only knows how to take it, and as soon as their voter base wants something else, they are perfectly content to use your money in return for loyalty from their voters. And if you don't like it, you're a racist, sexist, homophobic, misogynist, ableist, Islamophobic, xenophobic bigot who hates the poor and sick. This is what liberalism creates, a system that rewards the unproductive at the expense of the productive, and with never-ending mouths to feed and votes to win, they make more promises that cost more money, and those who have the money and run the businesses that provide the jobs end up leaving, and then you have a failed state.